the Ark of the Covenant is just a wooden box covered in gold, a Sunday school prop, a metaphor for divine presence, then how do you explain the hyper-specific dimensions that perfectly match the requirements for an atmospheric capacitor? Or the exact layering of conductive and non-conductive materials that modern physics uses to store lethal amounts of electrical charge? And finally, what about the ancient records detailing the physical symptoms of those who approached it unprepared? Symptoms mathematically identical to acute radiation poisoning and massive high-voltage electrocution.
Today, we are taking apart history's most dangerous artifact. Not with theology, with engineering. We are going to reconstruct the Ark, layer by layer, according to the original ancient blueprints. And the most terrifying part is waiting for you at the end. Because I didn't just read the instructions, I built it. And what I found inside changes absolutely everything we think we know about the ancient world.
The Ark is too often shown as a flat, one-dimensional relic, a glowing chest in a desert tent, a magic trick. But if you look deeper, past the sermons and the Hollywood illustrations, a completely different shape emerges. You realize you are not looking at a sacred monument. You are looking at a machine. And like all machines, it requires a builder, a mind obsessed with precision, tasked with containing a power that was never meant for human hands. Let's call him the Archivist. And the Archivist left us a manual. First stop, the deep desert of the Sinai Peninsula. Thousands of years ago, a massive group of nomadic refugees is allegedly wandering this wasteland. They are surrounded by hostile empires, brutal temperatures, and starvation. Yet, amidst this fight for pure survival, they are given an order to construct an object of unimaginable exactness. The instructions do not read like a religious text. They read like an industrial schematic. The core of the box must be made of acacia wood, not cedar, not oak, acacia. Why? If you put acacia wood under a modern microscope, you see a dense, chaotic matrix of fibers. It is incredibly hard, resistant to insects, and most importantly, it is an exceptionally poor conductor of electricity. It is the perfect natural insulator. In a desert environment where humidity is almost zero, dry acacia wood acts as a dielectric barrier. But an insulator is only half of the equation. The Archivist's instructions commanded that this wooden box be plated inside and out with pure gold. Stop and think about that geometry. You have a highly conductive inner layer of gold, a highly insulating middle layer of acacia wood, and a highly conductive outer layer of gold. In the modern world, we have a name for this specific configuration. It is called a Leyden jar. It is a fundamental electronic component designed to store massive electrical charges. When you place a dielectric between two conductors, you create a capacitor. The Ark was not built to hold the Ten Commandments. It was built to hold voltage. When I began assembling my own replica, strictly following the ancient measurements, 2.5 cubits long, a cubit and a half wide, a cubit and a half high, the physical reality of what the Archivist was designing became intensely uncomfortable. The dimensions dictate a surface area capable of accumulating a staggering static charge. In the dry, hot winds of the desert, surrounded by the friction of a moving camp, a capacitor of this size, isolated from the ground, would absorb ambient static electricity relentlessly. But a capacitor needs a terminal, a place where the charge can bridge the gap and discharge. Now look at the lid, the mercy seat. It is cast from solid gold, and sitting on top of it are two cherubim, their wings stretching out, perfectly mirrored, with a precise, deliberate gap left between the tips of their wings. To a priest, it is the throne of God. To an electrical engineer, it is a spark gap. When the voltage differential between the inner and outer layers of the Ark reached a critical threshold, the electricity would seek the path of least resistance. It would arc across the gap between the golden wings. In the dark interior of a desert tent, this would produce a blinding, sustained flash of blue-white plasma, a literal pillar of fire.
And here is where the historical record turns from fascinating to deeply disturbing. Ancient texts record very specific protocols for handling the Ark. It could not be touched. It had to be carried on long wooden poles, more insulation, slid through golden rings. The people carrying it had to wear specific garments woven from linen, not wool. Wool generates static electricity, linen does not. They wore a breastplate embedded with specific stones, attached with gold chains. If you ignored these rules, the results were catastrophic.
Consider the story of Uzzah, a man tasked with transporting the Ark on a wooden cart. The cart hits a bump, the Ark shifts. Uzzah reaches out his bare hand to steady the golden box. The moment his skin makes contact with the outer gold layer, he drops dead. Instantly. The text says the anger of the Lord burned against him. But look at the mechanics of the scene. A grounded human being, barefoot in the dirt, reaches out and touches the outer conductor of a massive, fully charged capacitor. The stored electrical energy would instantly discharge through his hand, travel across his heart, and exit through his feet into the earth. Sudden cardiac arrest. It is not a myth. It is a fatal workplace accident. But the electrical theory, as shocking as it is, only scratches the surface of what the archivist was actually doing. Because electricity doesn't explain the sickness. As I built the inner housing of the replica, I hit a wall. A capacitor of this size can deliver a lethal shock, yes, but the ancient texts describe something else happening to the enemies who captured the Ark. When the Philistines stole it and placed it in their cities, the population didn't get electrocuted. They broke out in tumors. Their hair fell out. They suffered from severe internal bleeding, nausea, and a horrifying wasting disease. They weren't being shocked. They were being irradiated.
Which brings us to the final, most terrifying layer of the blueprint. What was actually placed inside the box? The official story says stone tablets. But stone doesn't kill entire cities. To understand the sickness, you have to look at where the builders of the Ark came from. They had just fled Egypt. Egypt, home to some of the most advanced, closely guarded scientific knowledge of the ancient world. Deep beneath the pyramids, in the granitic bedrock, modern geologists have found anomalous concentrations of radioactive isotopes, uranium, radon. What if the Ark was never meant to be a capacitor for atmospheric electricity? What if the gold and the dense wood were meant to act as rudimentary radiation shielding? Gold is one of the most dense elements on the periodic table. It is incredibly effective at blocking alpha and beta radiation and even attenuating gamma rays. A box lined with thick gold, sealed shut, is exactly what you would build if you needed to transport a highly radioactive material across a desert. When the Philistines captured the Ark, they didn't know the protocols. They didn't know how to handle the shielding. They likely opened it. By doing so, they broke the seal. They exposed their entire population to the raw, unshielded core. The symptoms described in the ancient texts, the tumors, the bleeding, the agonizing deaths, are a textbook clinical description of acute radiation syndrome. This is what my replica taught me. When you build the box, when you stand next to it and feel the weight of the materials, the religious veil drops completely. You are standing next to a containment vessel.
The archivist wasn't building a throne. He was building a mobile nuclear waste cask. And this changes everything. Because if the Israelites were transporting radioactive material, where did they get it? And more importantly, what were they using it for? There is a valley in the modern-day Middle East, a place where the sand is fused into green glass, trinitite, the exact same glass found at the Trinity test site in New Mexico after the detonation of the first atomic bomb. Mainstream science blames it on meteor impacts, but there is no crater. The heat required to fuse desert sand into glass in this manner is upwards of 3,000 degrees Celsius. The ARK was a weapon, but it was also an engine. As the pieces of my replica came together, the final terrifying truth of the archivist's design became clear. The ARK was placed inside the tabernacle, a highly complex, multi-layered tent. The innermost room, the Holy of Holies, was perfectly cubic. The walls were lined with copper and gold. The high priest could only enter once a year, wearing protective gear, surrounded by a thick cloud of incense smoke. Why the smoke? Because if there is a massive electrical discharge or hard radiation, smoke particles in the air become ionized. They make the invisible visible. The smoke was an ancient Geiger counter, a visual indicator of the field's strength. We look at the ancient world and we see primitive people in robes. But the architecture of the ARK proves that someone, thousands of years ago, understood the fundamental laws of the universe. They understood conductivity. They understood insulation. They understood containment. They built a machine that harnessed forces we didn't rediscover until the 20th century, and they dragged it across the desert to conquer a continent. When you finally realize what the ARK actually was, the stories don't become less magical. They become significantly more terrifying. Because magic is just a story, but physics is real. And the physics of the Ark of the Covenant suggests that human history is not a slow climb from ignorance to enlightenment. It is a cycle of discovering terrifying power, using it to destroy, and then burying the evidence under layers of myth, religion, and gold. The box is real. The power was real. The only question left is, where is the core now?